My name is Amy Chen Mills-Naim. Hi, Jen. And I'm a three principles practitioner. I have been for over 20 years. I would also say that I have read widely, and you could say studied widely, if that's the appropriate word. You might want to say instead reflected widely on many spiritual traditions. And so I have a real sense of, the truth being everywhere. Sometimes you have to dig a little to find it, but there it is. And in terms of the principles, my father, Roger Mills, was one of the first people to go up and listen to Sydney Banks on Salt Spring Island. And so my history goes back to when I was 8 or 9 years old, and my father was packing me up in a van with our cat on the dashboard and our pet dog, Waggles, who I think we first got on Salt Spring Island, and my pet rat in a cage, all in this van, traveling back and forth from Oregon first and then California to go listen to Sydney Banks, who was the founder of the three principles, or the first one to articulate the three principles. So what I'd like to do, just having said that, is get a show of hands if you want, or you could comment. Is there anyone who's just completely unfamiliar with what those principles are? And if you're on the phone, you can unmute yourself. If you're completely unfamiliar, raise your hand or let me know, because that'll give me a sense of how to start. Okay, so no one's unfamiliar. Nonetheless, we'll go over them again to just have a basis for the conversation. The idea behind the free principles is to offer something that is really a ground level intro to the principles, but also is free of charge so that it's easy to join. It's, it's very low risk, and also just to start to see and to share with you what I see as the principles as formless truth. Meaning there's lots of ideas we start to have about, I'm going to do a mute right now because I'm hearing noises. Okay, I've muted everyone. Can you hear me still? Okay. We as human beings get lots of ideas about anything we read, any course of study, whether it's self-help or spiritual or religious or political. We always either we gravitate to, we find, or we create a system of ideas. And then we start to try to fit ourselves into that system, because that's sort of the human pack mentality, like, how do I join into this system or join into this group? There's strength in numbers, or a sense of wanting to be included or fit in or be approved of. And for me, the truth is much bigger than that, much, much bigger than a particular group, a particular practitioner, including myself, a particular movement. It is something that is alive and organic and moving constantly inside of each one of us. So we'll talk about that. That's on the table, and all your questions are welcome. And then just to complete my introduction, because really this is it's a free principles, free webinar, meaning anything is worth talking about here if it's pointed to truth. Any question or a question about applications in schools or whatnot. So I just want to share also my background, which is that, long story short, I got involved in the three principles after going through a period of depression, doing research on depression and the biochemistry of depression as a journalist, writing an article about that, and then realizing that there was so much that we had not answered about depression. And the question that emerged from within me, my essential question at that moment of doing the research and writing this article was, what about the human spirit? And I became enamored of this question. It took me over. And in my research, I was also interviewing my father's colleagues like Bill Pettit and Gordon Truckman in Hawaii, who's another psychiatrist, Mark Howard, who's been a longtime practitioner and a psychologist here in California. And I was so touched when they talked about both the fact that they had suffered and been insecure and depressed, even within their professions, and even while trying to help others, and also the confidence that they had in sharing something that they found that they felt could really help human beings who suffered. And it just made sense. It made logical sense to me. And so my whole world opened up, and I saw that I didn't want to be in journalism anymore. I wanted to help people who were suffering because I had suffered, and I knew what that felt like and how awful that was. So that began a whole nother phase of my life where I got involved in Santa Clara County's 3 Principal Services Division, which was called Health Realization at the time. And we were trained there together as a group, myself, Gabriela Maldonado, Linda Ramus, Kathy Casey was involved. I think Gretchen, you may have been involved a little bit at some point. That's okay. You can answer later. But lots of people came through that program. You're actually muted, Gretchen. Sorry. Let me get to the end and then I'll unmute you and you can fill in. Okay, I forgot that I had to unmute everybody. After about 6 years in the county, working with inmates and kids in juvenile hall and schools and county employees, there was a tremendous amount of work going on here in Santa Clara County. We were doing maybe 35 to 45 classes a week in the county system through the Department of Alcohol and Drug Services. So it was really trial by fire when I first got trained. I just got thrown into all this work, and that was a blessing because there was, we got paid to do this work as well, and that's not always easy, to get paid to do this kind of helping work. So I did that for many years, and then I started the Center for Sustainable Change with my father, which was a nonprofit, which was based on his work in communities, inner city communities, crime-ridden communities, schools, really with some significant outcomes in all of these communities. I mean, he was on the Today Show for his work at Modelo in South Dade County, Florida. That was his first project. And many of you, I think, have seen all the videos of his work. And we continued that work through the center. We got funding from the Kellogg Foundation and the San Francisco Foundation and other foundations to work across the country on something called the National Community Resiliency Project. So we did that for many years. And then I finally left the center. So that's my background. Now I have my own coaching practice based in Northern California. And I encourage everyone to go. I have a website called www.amychen.com. And there's a lot of stuff coming up. I'll announce more of that at the end of the webinar, but let's get to it for now. Let me just unmute Gretchen. Let's see if I can do that. Okay, you're unmuted, Gretchen. Can you share? You were sharing something, but I can't hear you. You might be self-muted. I think you're muted. We can't hear you, so we'll just wait, and I'll let you know if we can hear you. So I think what I'll do is just start with an introduction to the principles, the free principles, and then we'll go into specific questions that people may have about that. And I'll just keep it brief because most of you have already heard the principles. So in a nutshell, I say that and I'm curious what a nutshell will sound like of these 3 principles. So the first one is mind. And mind is the energy and intelligence of all things, whether in the form or formless. And then the second one is consciousness. Consciousness is our awareness, our capacity to experience life through the senses, through our emotions, through, I mean, that may really be it. That's what we experience life through, right? Our senses and the emotions. I'm trying to think if there's anything else beyond that. So we experience this life through this, what we consider to be the body, right? And the sense of taste, touch, smell, the heartbeat, the hearing, all of it. And that's what constitutes aliveness for us. I'm alive. I'm here. That's a fact. And then thought is the principle that allows for what I call differentiation or relativity. If there were no thought, whether divine thought, universal thought, you can say, if you don't like the word divine, there would be no relativity. There would be no tree and sky. There would be no dark and light. Thought is the creator of both external experience, what we consider to be external experience, and our own experience. So that when we look at a shape, we say tree. That's a thought. It's a way, we all share in a collective, at least for each society, there's a collective shared reality. And then for each family, there's a collective shared reality and thought. And then for each individual, there's an individual reality and thought. So that what I think and what my husband thinks or what my daughter thinks is very different. And we experience life through those thoughts. So that I can be sitting with a friend, as I was yesterday, and talking about something, and she could be crying about it, and I can be, it's the same thing we're both thinking about, and I'm trying to cheer her up because I don't see it so badly. And those are two different ways of seeing the same thing. So our thoughts create what's happening in consciousness for us, meaning the sense, even it affects our senses, our physical body. It affects our emotions for sure. So we know that the minute we think something that feels freeing, and alive, that we wow, there's unlimited potential in my life. I don't know what's going to happen in the future. I'm so excited to find out. That's one kind of thought. And then there's the other kind of thought, which is, oh, it's whatever's happening now, if it's not so great, is all there'll ever be. And I'm trapped, and I can't, I'm stuck, and life sucks, and it's terrible, and it's awful. I'll stop there for your sake. If any of that sounds familiar. But honestly, we all go through that. Even the most, quote, advanced or senior practitioners will have their moments. And one thing I love about this whole community, for the most part, is that people tend to have a lot of humility about sharing that even if they've been teaching for 20, 30, 40 years, they still can get caught up in negative thoughts. That's not the point. The point isn't that we're trying to get rid of our negative thoughts. The point is that we know that they are thoughts, meaning they're not reality. So I still go through periods of feeling, whatever, anxious or depressed or sad sometimes, less so than in the past, but sometimes. And the only difference between me and someone else is that I know that it's just my thinking in the moment. And that's, to me, that's the key. It's the difference between continuing to feed those thoughts and give them energy to continue that particular view of reality, or to just say that's what's happening, like the clouds in the sky. You guys, you have to see these clouds in the sky. I don't know if you can see this. Do you see? just understanding that thoughts are like clouds in the sky. And if we don't continue to believe and feed them, the tendency is that they'll pass. And then we get to experience what I would call the blue sky of us. That thing that is behind the clouds always, that thing that always exists, whether clouds are there or not, which has been called our innate mental health, which has been called our core, which has been called our wisdom, which has been called our peace of mind, which has been called quiet mind, which has been called silent mind, or silence, just silence. The silence of no thoughts, no personal thoughts. So having said that, I'm going to open this up because that's as much of a nutshell as I can do with the 3 principles. And I'm going to unmute everyone. So just be aware that if there's noise in your background, we'll all hear it. So maybe you can mute yourself if there's noise in your background. Okay, so everyone's unmuted now. And Gretchen, I see you still. If you look at the bottom of your screen, there's a video and a mute icon. If you kind of move your cursor around on the Zoom screen, and I don't know if that will help or not, or if it's something else in your system. Well, we'll wait. We'll just wait and see. You can type something in the chat box, though, if you want, if it's a question. So how are people sitting with this? And, I have the question of why did you join? Was there something in particular, or even about the description of the webinar that appealed to you, or was it just the cost?
Can I speak?
Yes. Hi, Debbie.
Hi there. I signed up for it because I've just come across your radio show. I think I'm working my way through it.
Yes, it's quite a lot.
I'm on about the fourth one at the moment, and really, really enjoying it. I love listening to you. So when this opportunity came up, I felt I wanted to come and hear you.
Welcome and thank you. Yes, I have to tell you, I'm a little self-conscious about those shows because it was years ago. I mean, maybe 4 years ago when they started, and I think I wonder what I was like 4 years ago. But it sounds like it's helpful, and that's the main.
Yes, yeah, I'm really enjoying them. Yes, and I try and snatch whatever time I can to listen, but I always want to have the whole hour.
Yeah.
So I'll wait till I can find an hour and then listen to another one.
Yeah, great.
So thank you for them. I'm really enjoying them.
Good. Yeah, those are. If you haven't seen those, Selena and I just put them up on my website. We actually are missing quite a few, so we're searching for the ones we lost, but there are, I think, 50 or so up on the website now, and some with amazing speakers, people who are in the principles world and even outside. Gangaji, I think I've interviewed 3 times on the radio show. So
can I sorry, I don't want to hog all the time, but I'm just curious. You said as a child that you went with your dad. Were you actually in the room listening as a child?
For 5 minutes.
Right.
It was like, oh, here we go with this sitting around talking business, no way. Yeah, I mean, I had the sense, and I do have a podcast, I think, on my website that is with Owen McCabe that I really like, where he interviewed me about what it was like to be a child on Salt Spring Island. And in that interview, fresh insights came up for me, because what I remember about being a child, around Sydney Banks and his wife, Barb, at the time. He had his first wife who passed away. There was definitely a sense, because all human beings and children are sensitive to feeling states, right? We all have a sense of the energy in the room or around us, if it's, emotional energy, or with Sid, a sense of a spiritual energy, or almost like a power. And we could feel that from him, and we could certainly feel the amount of respect that the adults had, that my father had for Sid. We didn't understand it, but we could feel the power and the energy of that. And then at the same time, who was interested in sitting in a living room listening to some guy talk about being in the here and now, when we were already in the here and now? And not all children have the privilege of always being able to live in the beauty of the here and now, when their parents are struggling or troubled, or when they don't have parents, or when they're in Syria or wherever. I'm not saying that all children have this experience, but many children, if not most, when there aren't negative outside factors, and even sometimes when there are, kids in refugee camps, I think, have an easier time of it, because they're looking for how to have fun in the refugee camp, right? And not, oh my God, I'm in a refugee camp. So there's a way that we have, and this is so important for all of us to recognize, we have that mental health and that capacity for being present. That's built in. And that's the insight I had with Own, is how funny that I went on this journey, from when I was maybe in high school and college, of starting to feel insecure in life, starting to feel like I had to be somebody rather than just be. And then I would go through all this, struggle and depression and reading and insight and learning the principles, and to come back to where I already was, what I already had. Because isn't it true that when our minds become quiet, we feel that childhood wonderment again, and that sense of, wow, like life is cool. And it's incredible how much we've gotten into the habit of trying to hold a lot in our minds, and kids just don't do that as much. And it's starting to see that we don't have to hold a lot in our minds to make our lives work. In fact, we hold far too much in our minds to make our lives work well, to the point where we're negating that goal of having our lives work well, because there's so much in our minds that we're stressed and we're in negativity. And so nothing feels right or goes right, because we're encountering the world and human beings in it from a space of worry and negativity and anxiety. And that's not effective. So it feels scary to let go of having a lot on your mind. And yet it's the most powerful thing you could do. What an irony. As adults, we think we must have a lot on our minds. I see some kids there. Am I right or what? I see Flavio's kids. They're like, we just don't have a lot on our minds. So, was that helpful, Debbie? Okay, so we have some newer folks. Graham, I see there's a Santa Cruz person on the line who's on the phone. And Selena's saying she thinks, Gretchen, you're unmuted now. So if anyone has a question or a comment.
No.
Uh-oh. Gretchen, you were on and then we heard you for a second. Okay, everyone should be unmuted, but I think people have muted themselves. I'm unmuting again, everybody. Gretchen's desperately trying to say something. Well, while we're waiting for Gretchen, does anyone have any questions about anything at all, whether education, working with kids?
I have something. Hi.
Hi, Sharon.
Hi. Thank you so much. It's nice to meet you.
Oh.
I've listened to you a lot and really appreciate so much. You're sticking to sort of, I guess, the truth of it. And I heard you at one point. This is the first time in my life that I'm actually formally talking to people about the principles.
Okay.
And I heard something, and I'm just beginning, and it's a really interesting journey. I heard you say at one point, if you go in sort of to wanting to teach it, then you have a lot of thinking on your mind, and that really struck me. And I just wonder about, and I noticed that that I love to talk about this, but there's a thought sometimes that comes up like, I know something that will help people that they don't know. And while that may be in some ways true, pointing to the principles that Sid discovered, it carries with it a feeling of like, I have something they don't. And I don't know exactly what my question is, except that I feel like when I am really just present with people and seeing what they know, and there's something more true about it. But I find that I'm not solidly in that state, that I'm falling back into. This was so helpful in my life. I have more joy than I could have ever imagined from a history of tons of trauma. And it just feels like such a gift that I've gotten this, that I want to give it. But there's something implied in that I never felt around Sid, like that he had something we didn't have. I never felt that. So I just wonder if you could sort of speak to that idea of sharing something that's so helpful without being the one who knows. Do you know what I mean?
Well, that's the ego part, and the truth may be that you actually do know something, or you know how to express something, perhaps, that would be helpful to someone. I think Sid felt that way, and he would express it. Sometimes whether you wanted to hear it or not, to be honest. Sometimes you absolutely did not want to hear it. And you would get angry about it or be hurt by it because he was not one to be too concerned about how you took it, how your ego took it. So for me, what I'm seeing is that it's not so much what you say, or whether or not you say it, in a moment. It's how we attach our identity to what's happening. So you could say identity, ego, same thing. Meaning, if we're successful, we feel good. If I can change this person, I feel good. And if not, then I'm going to feel bad, as a helper or as... So that's the piece to just take out of the equation. And that's the piece you take out when you feel your ego gearing up. And then you just kind of relax. And you're, okay, I'm just going to hang out with this person. Suddenly you go back into neutral. And it feels better. But that doesn't mean that you should never say something, right? It just means that you had the experience of feeling a little identity around whether or not to share, and then you dropped out of that. You let it go. So, so what I see is that when there isn't so much identity around sharing, when it's not about you, which honestly, just to tell you all, I mean, it's taken me years. I shared quite a bit with a lot of attachment to how it went. So, like, that's normal. That's what we do. We care about our impact.
Yeah.
And yet the deepest seeing for me in the last 5 years has been seeing that the less we are attached to any outcome, the more free we are, both to be bold sometimes and to step back when we can feel that we're pushing too hard. So it's not about, it has nothing to do with any particular mode or way of sharing, or whether your tone of voice. Honestly, Sid could be yelling at people, right? When he felt like that's what was needed to get them to hear. I'm not saying he never made mistakes. Sometimes he did, but there was a sense of the impersonal in what he was, conveying, or in the context of what he was sharing. Like, this is not about me. This is about the truth.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Right.
so I know that in the beginning it can be like, well, I shouldn't share, and I should just let go, and we're all equal, and it's democratic and universal, and everyone knows. I know that thought too. But then if you stay in that, what happens is you see that actually nothing happens. People do need to hear some information, right? It's nice that they can have a good feeling with you.
Yeah.
And there's certainly a lot of power in, just love. I mean, love and understanding, just being a friend, or being just loving somebody in whatever form that takes, whether that's giving someone a hug, or, helping them out in some way physically. But when we're talking about sharing the principles, right? If that's your role as a coach or a trainer, then some information will need to come out at some point. Right? And it's then that you want to stay in that feeling of love, if but it doesn't matter how it comes out, and it'll come out how it needs to come out if you're not attached to the outcome.
Mm-hmm. That's great. I just saw how I managed to have a whole lot of thinking about about that, about not having thinking. That's great.
Yes,
that's great. Just when the mind relaxes, that it will just occur to me. When my mind relaxes, it'll just occur to me.
Yeah. Yeah, and I don't know if this is helpful too. Are there a lot of people who are currently coaches on the line? 1, 2. Yeah, we've got a lot of people who are getting into the coaching. I know Jen, or they already have been coaches for some time. So this is a very relevant, question and exploration. And I just want to share that it's also fine to stumble around. I think that there's this sense of, we see these practitioners who are so smooth and they're so they're either polished, or there's such a nice feeling about them. There's something just there's a quality there. And so we sort of think, oh, well, that's what I need to have, that quality. We may have someone in particular in mind.
Yeah.
But really, in the end, it's you. Yeah. It has to be you. It has to be totally who you are, the way that you express, and you will stumble, because I stumbled quite a bit, and I don't stumble as much anymore. I don't know if I don't stumble anymore, or if I just don't care if I do. So I don't notice. I stumble and I'm like, okay, whatever.
Either way.
Yeah. It's like, I just don't think so much about the things that don't happen or didn't happen, or, why think about that? Unless, if there's learning, fantastic. If there's wisdom to be gained, but otherwise it's all just ego thinking.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the key. When the ego thinking starts to calm down, or you start to see through it as ego thinking, then it doesn't even matter if you're coaching anymore. Honestly, you start to see that it doesn't matter what you're doing. That's the freedom, the true freedom. For a lot of people I see wanting to be practitioners or trying to be or being coaches, is there's an attachment to the role itself as meaningful to one's identity.
Right.
Or self-worth, you know. Mm-hmm. And that's something that when you start to let go of that, and you're really getting somewhere, and you may continue to coach, but you don't care anymore. That's huge, because that's saying like it doesn't really, well-being is really non-contingent. It's not contingent on me even being a successful coach. Like I could fail as a coach, totally. And still, where is my well-being? Where did it go? Is it here? That's the freedom I speak of when you see I do a lot of freedom in the formless events. And that's the freedom I speak of, is freedom from all circumstance. You know, there's this is why people continue to learn the principles or continue to learn spiritual truth, whether you want to call that learning or unlearning, you know, misinformation that we already have. The reason they continue often is because there's still a misunderstanding about some circumstance, whether outside of us or even inside of us, that needs to shift for well-being to really happen. Does that make sense to people? I'm opening this up again. That even after we've learned the principles, we can still think there's something in the future that's going to save us.
I have a question here. I don't know if you can hear me now.
I can hear you. Yes. Are you in Santa Cruz?
This is Mark. Yeah, I'm in Capitola, actually.
Oh my goodness. I'm in Santa Cruz.
Yes, I know.
Okay. Is this a Mark that I know already?
I don't think so. I don't think we've met. Yeah.
Well,
I'm watching the same clouds.
What?
I'm watching the same clouds passing by this morning.
Right. Yay.
So my question is about the experience of finding that easy enough to say, oh, well, this is just a thought in certain areas of my life, but I've got a particular area where they seem particularly persistent and real. And so I guess my question is about sort of dealing with that sort of strange thing of seeming like having the experience of being able to see that illusion, and then certain areas where, you know, it's just being kind of trapped by that particular thought process, or whatever it is.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. So what is the question then? I'm sorry if I didn't catch it. But so you're saying in some areas of your life or some thought patterns.
Yeah, it's easy enough to say, oh, well, that's just a feeling connected to a thought, and I can kind of more or less, it's easy to sort of not get drawn in by it. And then there's other particular areas that it seems to be more difficult to do that with. And so I guess my question is, I don't know, strategy for dealing with that, and I know that's not, you know, it all boils down to getting into that space, but there's that hook in certain areas.
Yes.
I guess that's, not sure how better to articulate the question.
Right. Well, you know, welcome to the club, right? We're all, there's no one on this call, myself included, who doesn't have areas of getting caught up in thinking and choosing, if even subconsciously, to decide that thinking defines us, or the thinking is real. So that, I think. Again, it's always about something in between ourselves and what we are, which is so funny, because how can something even get in between ourselves and what we are? It's just a thought. So do you want to share, or do you feel comfortable sharing a particular pattern, or is that too personal?
I think I could do that. It has to do with work and not wanting to do what I'm doing and not seeing another direction or solution. And I think part of the process is being able to kind of disconnect from that worry and getting into a nice feeling, but not finding a solution, and it sort of keeps, it's like time passes, and it's the same situation seems to be occurring. And at this point in time, it feels like, well, the only solution or way to deal with it is to accept the situation, although I still have a preference for things to be different. So that's in a nutshell, I think.
Okay, so you have work that you do now that keeps you alive and supported.
Yes.
Yes, and you don't want to leave it because you don't have another option to keep yourself supported at this time.
Correct.
But you don't like this work.
Correct.
Okay. And so because you don't see another option and you don't like this work, this is frustrating. I'm sorry, I'm just laying it 1 + 1, right?
Yes.
Right.
So far, so good.
Right. Okay. So, I mean, sometimes there is an option to leave that we don't see, right? That's wisdom. That's based on something that I can't speak to you about because it's something you have to feel, right? But if you're feeling like what you're saying right now is, well, I don't think I can really leave. That doesn't feel right, at this moment. But I'm frustrated because there's not another place I can jump into to work, and this work is frustrating to me. And then you said, but I see that if I can maybe try to accept this, that seems to be the only direction I have. Is that right?
Yes.
Yes. Yes. So
At
how
least
are
in
you?
the short.
Pardon?
At least in the short term.
Yes. Yeah. So how's that going for you then? That acceptance bit?
It works for a time being, but then it's it doesn't. It's not something I can seem to be able to stay with permanently.
Okay. Okay.
Well, so it goes for short bits, like for a day, and it seems like a lot of work to get there.
Oh. Okay. And you don't feel like, does wisdom sometimes offer you, oh, it's just time to leave and just go into the unknown without knowing what your next option is? Are you there?
I'm not sure. Yes, I'm here. I'm I don't know how to answer that. I'm not sure if I do or don't. I don't. I have that thought sometimes, but I don't see it as viable. But.
Okay. Well, I just wanted to mention that because we sometimes get the idea that because of the principles, we accept every condition and every situation. And that's not the way that I see life. I think we have lots of choices in life. We can choose to leave jobs, and we can choose to leave relationships. We can choose to leave cities. We can, but the question is more, where is that choice coming from? Is it coming from a sense of, this feels right? And it may take a sense of courage. If I do this, it'll take some courage. because I've identified with this current position, or I've identified, or I feel safe in this community, and yet my heart is really telling me to go. That's something that each person needs to navigate on their own, So I'm not an absolutist in the sense of, I've sometimes heard people say, oh, it's not the job, it's you. Well, that's true to the extent that each day on the job, we create our emotions around it through our thoughts, but that doesn't mean that it's the right job for us. I think that life is wide open, So I'm not sure. So let me just ask you directly then, does that feel like wisdom to leave in this moment?
It would be going into the unknown. I think that's the main sort of, it does in one sense. I'm kind of split, It's like, because that's the question I keep asking myself: is this me running from something, or like I need to work this out, or do I just walk away from this? Especially when there's nothing sort of presenting itself that,
Right.
as an alternate. Yeah.
Sometimes things will not present themselves as a safety, the lifeboat is not there by the boat, right? Not always. And still you jump. But I don't know. I'm not counseling you in that direction. I'm just saying that somewhere and if your wisdom is that you need to leave, it'll just get stronger and stronger, that feeling of I need to leave. It will, and you don't have to worry about it. It'll get to a point where you just can't stay. So that there's that. And then on the other hand, while you're here, I like what you're saying about acceptance, because what else can you do, right? And it may feel like a struggle, but sometimes it does feel like a struggle. Sometimes we just have these habits of thinking that are, troublesome. I don't know how else to put it. It's not, and it feels like struggle. Sometimes I refer to, Abraham, was it Abraham, or I think Abraham's son wrestling on the river with God, like wrestling with God. Sometimes life feels like that. And it takes some of that. It's not that we want to wrestle. I'm not counseling you to wrestle. It's just that that's what happens when we're just kind of conflicted, in our thinking. It's just a natural outcome. And then we burst through. And we're like, oh. So I guess for me, the mystery with you, Mark, is I don't know if the struggle is really with sort of just taking that step into the unknown, or whether the real struggle is with really just letting go of all your thinking about the place where you're working now, Do you want to say anything else?
I think that's good for now.
All right. Well, keep us posted. Yeah. And if something occurs to you during the course of the call, I think we have maybe 20 more minutes. Let us know.
Okay. Thanks.
Okay.
Yep.
Yeah. I say this because I've been in both situations. When I was running the center, I was the director, and then I was the quote unquote education director. And then I was, I was education director at the end, and it just started to feel like not the place for me. I could feel it in my bones. And I kept struggling with that because it was my identity. It was my career. It was my way of showing up in the Three Principles community with some credentials. It was a lot of things in terms of thought and identity and ego. And it was my community in terms of having like colleagues that I loved. And yet there was something in me that was saying, it's time to move on. it's time to move on. And I didn't know what that would look like. And so in that case, I could just sense that the fear was around leaving. And so I was more curious about what was that fear about, and could I start to let that go? Could I start to see through that? And then it was like my heart just kept getting louder, it's time to go. And I can't tell you what a relief it was, when I got through that struggle to say, I'm done, and to announce my kind of resignation, although I still love and support everyone there and the work that they do, So I've had that experience of like trying to really follow my heart when I had a lot of fear. And then I had the opposite experience of like, I have this thinking, just to be very honest with you all, I grew up with a single father, a very accomplished person, Roger Mills, and all these achievements. And I tend to be a career-oriented person that way, and having kids I wanted to have kids, but you start to realize, it's hard to do everything. So there was a point at which I realized, wait a second, I have kids. I can't do everything. Like I'm going to wear myself out. And I could see that it wasn't working for my kids. This was maybe 2 years ago. And it was sort of like having a midlife crisis, but I want to be writing books and traveling and all this stuff. And yet every time I traveled, I felt like it was hard for me and it was hard for the kids. And then I said, well, Amy, do you want to not be a mom? Is that even possible for you? And the answer was no. You wanted to have kids. You have kids. Enjoy your kids. And so I realized, I just have to accept. I have to totally accept motherhood right now. And that brought me great joy.
Thanks for sharing the both directions there. It kind of helps. I think I'll sit with the question of letting it go and see how that feels for a while.
Okay, great.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, only really.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So Gretchen had a post. You mentioned internal and external experience. Would you explain more about external experience? Well, I think I was talking about thought creating external experience. Is that right, Gretchen? You can type in some more, but we just can't hear you at all. So we're waiting for Gretchen to type in a little more some specifics. Thanks for your patience, everyone. There are always some technical difficulties on these things. So Gretchen, are you typing now? Just want to hear more on the difference between external and internal experience. Well, I can't say that I'm the master or the mystic that knows exactly, how to talk about external and internal experience. But when I talked about thought creating all experience, including external, I'm looking out at nature, at trees, and it seems external to me, right? But in a sense, it is internal because my experience of the tree is coming from me. Now, at the same time, I have this sense that there's this shared reality. All of us see something we're calling a tree. And that to me is the creation of thought that's not personal thought. It's you could say the wisdom of nature, or the thought of nature. How does the seed know? And then we look out at our political world or our social world, and we see all kinds of things happening. And I like to sometimes make a distinction, because I know that people have different opinions about this election, and for the most part, people in my world are pretty upset, and I know other people are not upset. They're happy. But one woman said to me, how are we creating this? How did I create this in my experience? And I thought, oh, that's interesting that she's thinking she created this in her experience, where I would say we've created this. Because everyone out there is thinking. And it's the quality of our thinking, sort of all combined, that creates everything we see out, quote unquote, outside of us. So that's why quality of thought is so important, isn't it? Because when we think in a way that's divisive or fearful of others, or where we get attached to an ideology, that's what I see as the worst thing of all, is we get attached to ideology, whether on the left or on the right or in between, or libertarian or green, or I've seen differences even in the big activist community that's grown up here in Santa Cruz. We have a very progressive town, and there are people within that community that have very different ideologies about how to work together or move together, or not. And it's when we get attached to an ideology or a concept that we can no longer see the truth of this moment, of what's needed in this moment. And that really speaks to one of the themes of these webinars, which is we can have ideas about the three principles, about what wisdom should look like, or what our activities should look like, or what how we should be teaching, or whether we should always be in a good state of mind. We have so many ideas, and it's not that ideas are a problem, it's when we get attached. Because then we are no longer free. That's why they say throw it all away. At some point, even all the concepts we have about principles, politics, whatever it is, throw it all away. And then you're back to that pure potential, and open to fresh wisdom, a fresh thought that may be completely, it might be completely opposite to what you thought the three principles were about, or completely opposite to what you thought, say, politics was about, or religion, or your religion, or your... That's the beauty of a quiet mind. That's the beauty of throw it away. Because we will accumulate ideas. And that was something I had to do around the principles, because I would run up against someone saying something and think, oh, I should really believe that, because that person is, that's so-and-so, that's a heavy duty person, someone who knows a lot, who studied with Sydney Banks, and that person is saying X, Y, and Z. And so I had a habit of, okay, I need to, adopt that view. And sometimes it is something new, and it's something fresh, and something that's challenging that we should be looking at. But sometimes it's actually just a concept, in the sense that we have our own wisdom about what truth is for us, or for our situation, or for how we want to be teaching, or how we want to be living. And that, to me, is that is our most valuable possession. If we throw that away, which you can't because it's always there and it's formless, but if we start to ignore that for the sake of what someone else has to say, or the form of something, or a concept, or an idea, then we've given up truth. Because truth comes from one place. And if you've learned the principles and it's helped you, it's because the principles have directed you to that place, which is you. Okay, thank you, Laura. We just got a message from Laura. So I don't have a lot more to say. We have a few minutes if anyone else has a question. I think we were going to go to either 12:30 or 12:15, but we don't have to go that long, so we'll just see. Hello, is someone there? Okay, so any more questions?
I said that last week I told him that it's been tricky as being together here.
I can't tell if that's someone asking a question or just chatting. Do you guys hear that? I can't manufacture a question. Okay, fantastic. So I'm going to mute everyone. And I feel like someone's cutting in on the wire because I've just muted everyone and I can still wait. Let me try. Okay, is that good? Okay, so I'm understanding there are no more questions. So I just want to just make a few announcements that we're going to do these quarterly. So this is our second one this year. We'll have another one in the summer and another one in the fall. And then I will be at it looks like the Three Principles Conference in England coming up, and then over to Finland the following weekend to do a 2-day seminar if you're in Europe. And then Selena's up here, and at least on my left-hand corner, are putting together, we had a big retreat scheduled with Jenny Kennard and Gabriella in California. We just found out the whole center is closing down. So we've had to throw out all our thoughts and regroup. So we're looking for another site for that retreat. And then the plan is to have 3 retreats and a personal grounding and professional development program through the 6 months, starting with that retreat. So there'll be public retreats and also a personal grounding program happening in California, which lands on those, anchored in those retreats as well. So just stay tuned to the website if you're interested in any of that. And then everything else is on the website, the radio show, and we'll post this this webinar up either on our audiovisual page or on the YouTube. I have a YouTube channel, so we'll probably do both initially. So if you want to come back and take another look, but I don't see any more hands up or questions. So, someone said they might have a site for my retreat. So can you get that down? Oh, this is private. Okay, so when everyone goes, we'll copy that down. Joel, thank you. Okay. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Oh yeah, let me unmute everybody so if we can say goodbye. Goodbye.
Bye. Thank you.
You, Amy.
Bye.
Thank you.